And with that, we are live. Welcome to another edition of the Friday Forecast. Seems like I was just here. In a way, I was. Speaking of here, he sat out the morning session, but he heard that Shonagh was going to be on the show today. So he decided that he wanted to show up and get in on the action here. It's Jasper the Astro Cat. You ready? You ready to dig in? Dig into today's content? So welcome to the Friday Forecast. And today's guest will be Shonagh, who is in Major League Baseball. They have this thing. It's called the 5-tool player. And it's used to describe somebody who could run, hit, field, throw, and have the intelligence to put it all together. So those are your superstar Hall of Fame players. They're pretty rare. Shonagh is about as close to a 5-tool player as you'll find in this space. And you'll find out over the course of our interview how many areas of daily life, practice, the mystical world, and what it is to be a human that her work is touched in on. And it's still evolving, still growing. And this is going to be a really great interview because we have a lot of interesting material to cover and talk about, and something that's really captured her attention, that for a lot of you who are into healing and alternative healing, and even what I would call electrical or technological, alternative technological healing. Very interesting information on today's show. But before we go off into the electromagnetic ethers, why don't we get right down to business here and start talking about our sponsor, which is True Hemp Science. And again, I can't say enough about Chris's products. Last night, once again, the gummy was my friend, and shortly after the gummy hit my tongue, I was pretty fast asleep. But there are plenty of products here on True Hemp Science, and as I've spoken before, they're all really meticulously picked out, crafted, processed, bottled, and delivered to you by my good friend Christopher Lynch, who is the head of True Hemp Science, even though on the website, the Earth is the CEO here. So if you're interested in really high quality hemp products and high quality service as well, go to truehempscience.com /ref/23. And if you buy $100 or more in product and you type in 15MINS, that's 15 mins, when you check out, Chris will give you some free product. And he's very generous at what he includes with your order. So if you spend $150 or more, you'll wind up getting free shipping. Now, what is the ultimate testament to a product's efficacy and the value of the business? It's return customers. And I can't tell you how many stories that I hear from Chris where people who've come through this portal continue to come back and place more and more orders as the days, weeks, and months have gone on. So that is clearly the absolute best testimonial any business can have is return customers and satisfy return customers. All right, so let's get into the show. Let's bring on our guest today. Ask her to start her video. It's my good friend Shonagh, whom I've known now for, are we on about 10 years now? Yes. Is that how long that's crazy.
It is crazy.
And we've never met in person, but that's going to change in October.
Yes, it is.
because you're going to be at our event here where there's the annular eclipse, which is going to be very interesting. The Ring of Fire eclipse on the sun running right through Texas and right over where we're going to be in Kerrville on the weekend of the 13th, 14th, and 15th. And I'm really psyched to have you be a part of our event this year. It's going to be great.
I'm honored. I'm really excited. I think I'm going to drive up there with Beverly and possibly the Crimmies. So fingers crossed.
Road tripping.
Yes, exactly.
So I don't think I've done a formal read on your bio. Let me do that because there's a lot in here. I'll read the first two paragraphs.
Is this from my website, Robert?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, let me do this.
Is it the home page, basically, right?
The Shonagh homepage?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
The Shonagh homepage?
Yeah. Yeah, there we are.
There you are. I love your website, by the way. It's a great website.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. My friend Angela Hartnett designed that. She's awesome.
So let me read this. My shamanic therapy work with clients is probing and revelatory in ultimately life renovating. I'm able to zero in on the origination point of the issue very quickly, which results in greater clarity and healing for my clients. In addition, I incorporate my extensive knowledge of nutrient-dense traditional foods to address symptoms like depression, anxiety, poor sleep, and other issues that are all too common in our modern world. Just as the mystical wise woman once served her community with her gifts of wisdom and intuition, so too my work follows that model. In this way, my clients achieve the aha far quicker than with conventional therapy and a much broader understanding of the underlying causes behind the issues. This results in greater access to happiness and harmony, which we are all seeking. So it gets into tapping into your ancestors, plant medicine, your various influences that you've incorporated here in your life. So let me go through some of your books. We have Psychedelic Mysteries of the Feminine, Creative Ecstasy and Healing, Honeybee Wisdom, A Modern Melissa Speaks, Love and Spirit Medicine, which is where you and I connected during the time that you wrote this book, which is a great book, and Eshel Wisdom, 7 Teachings from the Mind, Sacred Feminine, where this is where you were initiated into the mysteries of Eshel, the Mind, Mother Goddess, through a shamanic ceremony in the Yucatan with my teacher, Miguel Angel Vergara. The initiation opened a door to subtle messages that I've received when I tuned into the energy of Eshel. This book is a love letter to women, consisting of 7 rituals that are done to honor the goddess within. It is a treasure box of wisdom for women of all ages. So there's a lot here, and we're going to cover quite a bit of it, I think, over the course of our interview. But one of the things that really struck me is that there seems to be a lot of fantasy projecting in our culture where people will say, oh, I want to be a healer, or oh, I really want to be a shaman, or oh, I really want a light worker, right? Fill in the blank. And what people don't understand is that, and let's just take shamanism as an example, that to do that kind of work is really hard. Like it is not at times glamorous and adding just more tools to your toolkit. Like if you really go through that work and go through that world, you're really broken down, taken very deeply into the vault of all of your conditioning and cultural influences and your triggers, fears, and traumas, and you don't get to even begin to practice until you come out the other side of that. And that is not, and it's not real glamorous. And if you really work with and I don't know to the extent, maybe we can talk about this, what your experience was with your teacher, but in many cases, early on, there's a lot of grunt work involved too. right? There is a tremendous amount of grunt work. And only after a period of time is the true initiate brought into the power, the mystery, the gift of what's there for them. But people don't understand this. You have to prove that you're worthy of that, right? And your ego cannot play any part in the reception of that gift. So I want to talk a little bit about the World Economic Forum, and I'm going to transition into that. But I just love for you to address that question and that topic of what it was like for you and how people may fantasize in some ways about these glamorous spiritual roles and what it entails to get there, and really even like the grunt work on the other side of that as well.
Okay. All right. After you
No,
speak?
you do it now. Just do it now. Let's go ahead and do it now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I will say, first of all, that at the age of 40, okay, so wait, backtrack. As a child, I was very open. I was clairsentient, so I could feel things, and I was claircognizant, so I would know things. Information would just come. And I was also very much an outlier, and I tried desperately. It was cringeworthy in high school to fit in. That's all I wanted, right? To no avail. And so I just always felt like I was on the outside looking in, and that somehow I didn't get the memo, and I assumed that was something wrong with me. And so anyway, so I continued through life, and then got married, and around 30. And at 40, that marriage collapsed. And that was what I call the midlife face slap. And it sent me into far deeper exploration because my whole reality was shattered. And that's when I met someone who later became my next husband, who's now a dear friend. And he introduced me to his teacher, Dr. Brewjoy, MD. And Brewjoy was a Johns Hopkins trained MD who walked away from a very illustrious career. I'm very glad he did. And he began to teach. And he went to Findhorn, because you talked about Findhorn on our interview, which I'll talk about later. And he worked with a number of teachers, and then he began teaching, and his work was very Jungian inspired. And so that was my first meeting with all of that. And I was hooked. I fell in love with the Jungian understanding, and Marie-Louise von Franzen, Edward Edinger, and those became my teachers from the ethers. And I worked with Brew for 3 years. And then I worked with some other teachers. I found my way to a beautiful man, Miguel Angel Vergara, in the Yucatan. And that is where I had these just very beautiful experiences with the Mayan mama goddess, Ixchel. And there's a story to that I'll try to remember to tell regarding the mushroom and going back to the Yucatan, which was very pivotal for me. But I will say I had experiences there at the temples where I connected with just a sense that was very welcoming and very loving. And that is, I felt that very strongly from kind of the spirit presence there. Anyway, my 40s were really, I was and I still am very much a voracious seeker, but I wanted to really learn. And one of my teachers that I had at that time said, when you do this work, he wasn't speaking to psychedelics, I hadn't found my way to that yet, but just this work in general, he said, you must be impeccable. And I took that to heart. Like, I was a very dedicated student. And then I found my way to the mushroom at 48. And that was, I know, by design, because I needed 8 years of deep psycho-spiritual work under my belt. And I learned so much from Brew. He was a master at disseminating dreams. And that is also where I learned about shadow and projection and the ego inflation that can happen. And so there was all of this preparation for me to finally make my way to the mushroom. And when that happened, my marriage at that time was falling apart. And then I became involved with my friend who introduced me to the mushroom. And after a few months of that, he ended that very abruptly, and I didn't see it coming. And what it did was it sent me into a dark night of the soul. And I mean, just absolutely decimated me. And that was simply symptomatic of something that happened way back when. It goes all the way back to my adoption at almost 5 months old. So that was, and I see that as, that was so necessary to prepare me for the path that I'm on now. I was 48 at the time, 48, 49. And those first couple of years with the mushroom were very intense. And they were about my work and my unhealed stuff, my unfinished business, my unresolved personal material, is how I like to say, you know, and that was essential to kind of grow me, mature me in a way that I would be ready to take on the work that I was doing. And also the mushroom, the psychedelic world, that's not my world. I didn't know anything about that before, because before that, I didn't drink alcohol, I didn't do drugs, I didn't smoke marijuana, like nothing, and no pharmaceuticals. I keep a very safe distance from conventional doctors for good reason. And so that was completely new to me. And my approach was based on those 8 years of very superb teachers that I had, and that impeccability and that desire and respect that, all right, I'm going to enter something, you know, I don't have any experience with. I'm going to do this, you know, set up a proper space and go in always what I say with open heart, humble, seeking wisdom. I was really my whole life just want to sit at the feet of the sages, you know, and learn. And so it was really nature that initiated me into all of that. And I can continue to talk more of that as we go forward. But I'll tell you, those first couple of years were excruciating, like when all of that happened, and also great fear of being on my own and not having the confidence to, you know, and what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? All of this. And then this extraordinary, well, what I had to do at the age of 50, I realized, you know what, I'm in a relationship pattern that I need to heal. You know, there's no pointing the finger. Oh, they did this. Oh, poor me. Oh, he was so this. Like that's childish. It's like, all right, no, let me look inside. Where do I need to grow? What work do I need to do? And then I also realized, you know what? I need to be alone for a while. I need to heal and grow and also develop. What is my offering going to be? Because I don't fit into a peg. I will never work in corporate America. And I know I have something unique that is, you know, can be very helpful. And then the retreats were birthed a couple of years beyond that, where I host people in my home, which is my greatest gift, I tell you. I don't think anyone out there is doing this quite in that way, you know, and they're here for 5 days, and it's very intimate, deep work where I get to be witness to the living mystery that is that man or woman who I am hosting. And it's like 4 years of therapy in, you know, 4 or 5 days. And so I've been doing that for 8 years. And living basically like a nun. And I realized, like, this is part of it. Well, I also apprenticed myself to the mushroom. And I did that very early on because I realized, oh my God, this is a portal. This is a portal. And I also knew, I'm ready for this. And I wasn't ready even a couple of years ago, you know? So those teachers have been guiding me and teaching me. I refer to them as tutelary spirits, and I work with the she, which is the Irish word for fairy. And again, I'll go into all of that. Remind me to sort of touch back onto the Yucatan piece and then the Celtic piece, because I really came into my own roots through the guidance of the mushroom. And so now it's been 12 years of apprenticeship. And, you know, you graduate school in 12 years. That's not an accident. That's a big number.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and I tell you, so sort of I put myself out there, but also somewhat reluctantly, because I'm very honest and I'm very transparent. And so it also can make me very vulnerable. but I have always felt like the human experience is so important for us to share, and that there are elements in my experience that I think, I think would be good for others to hear. They could relate. So like even my book, Love and Spirit Medicine, is it's a raw, vulnerable woman's telling. I go into my own shadow, and I still hear every so often from someone who read the book who said, wow, damn, like, thank you for being so honest. That was quite something. And I learned a lot, or I really related, or whatever. And that feels really good to know, because we're all human on this journey, and we're here to learn.
Yeah. Well, I read your book cover to cover, and it's really, really good. Really, really good. And your description of your emotional states, your psychedelic states, like spot on. And especially with the psychedelic stuff, it's not easy to capture the sort of the ephemeral nature of it, right? I mean, it's like it's the ineffable and the ephemeral nature of the psychedelic experience. You do a great job of that. And I thought to myself, honestly, when I read your book and then I interviewed you for the first time, like, somebody needs to make a movie out of this book, right? This is like Eat, Love, Pray meets Altered States. I wonder if you had been a man, I wonder if that movie might have been made, right? I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question, because Daniel Pinchbeck's book was kind of right around the same time, right? The 2012 book, with some similar themes in some ways, but nobody made a movie out of that book either. So perhaps it's moot, right? A moot point.
Yeah. I don't know. It's all trendy now, though. So,
well, that's a really interesting, and I want to circle back to some of the things you said, but it's an interesting thing to bring up, and could also be a possible segue to what I wanted to play and then talk about. Because one of the things that seems to be happening is that psychedelics and entheogens are beginning to move out of the closet, right? They're starting to move into the topic of the mainstream discussion with healing. You've got this group MAPS, not to be confused with Minor Attracted Person Society, but MAPS being a longtime promoter of psychedelic and entheogen awareness. Joe Rogan talks a lot about it. You've got Aubrey Marcus, who takes Aaron Rodgers, quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, down to South America to do ayahuasca trips, right? So all this stuff now, microdosing, it's all starting to come back into the mainstream. And what I find both interesting and disturbing, and I would love to get your take on this, is that I ran across this woman through Twitter, and she was clearly somebody who was pro-vaccination, pro-science, whatever that is, pro-who, and she's a journalist, this woman. So I went through her, not her biography, but the recent list of her published articles, and buried not so deeply in this list of anti-vax and pro-vax polemics was an article on psychedelics and the therapeutic use of psychedelics, which she, through her handling of that topic, seemed to be for, right? So it's a really interesting dichotomy. So on the one hand, you have this hired gun who is out there spreading the gospel of the jab. But on the other side, she's also beginning to sprinkle these seeds about the power of psychedelics to heal trauma and pain. I'm like, well, what's going on here? Why are we looking at this kind of twin approach because it seems to me to be pretty cognitively dissonant in some ways.
Totally.
But maybe it's not. First of all, what is your take on the mainstreaming of psychedelics and entheogens for therapy? And then what is your take when you see these global entities wrap their arms around it? Because this is really what's happening.
Yeah. Well, first of all, they have, of course, efficacy. They can assist people in a big way to kind of see the broader picture in their mind. I will say quickly, MDMA, which is what MAPS is all about, that's not a psychedelic.
Right.
And it has great efficacy. There's no question, to assist with PTSD and numerous other ills. That said, I really always want to make it clear that psychedelics are not for everyone. They're absolutely not. They're being touted as kind of the answer, and there's no magic pill. And ultimately, within any kind of we'll call it shamanic path, if you will, or just a medicine, a traditional medicine walk, you've got to do the inner work. Especially with this, because this is working on the psyche. And of course, these people, there's so much suffering, and they are hoping that they'll have that psychedelic journey and it will bring tremendous resolution for them. And sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. And you have no control also of where the medicine, I call it medicine, where it's going to take you. We have no idea. It's very wild in that way, which I quite like, actually.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's that. That said, I think it's interesting how the psychiatric industry is sort of elbowing their way in and saying, we'll handle this and we'll provide the training. And I've spoken with a few people, because I work with all these different people. And so they tell me stories, and I hear a lot of personal stories of both sort of practitioners underground and then whatever. And then there's people who are training, and I won't say who, whatever this particular two people, but there's a lot of trouble in that training and a lot of sort of touching that shouldn't be happening and that kind of thing. And I've worked with, I get a lot of psychotherapists who come to work with me. And so I've worked with a few people who've been in that training, people who've left it out of disgust and, that kind of thing. So there's all that. And then in terms of the global piece, well, first of all, I know a lot of the tech industry is way into this, and there's a lot of money that has been invested in these sort of psychedelic clinics or retreat places. And there are a number of places anyway. You can go to Costa Rica and different places, and some are, I'm sure, fantastic, and others are probably questionable. And that would be with anything, right? So you have to really have your due diligence, and this is something very, very important for people, is they've got to really investigate thoroughly. And maybe if they can, speak with other people, look into those testimonials, because there's a lot of problems with ayahuasca, especially. A lot of people, have been with so-called shamans who've, molested them and raped them and that kind of thing, and it's where we're at. So we have to be really careful. But in any case, with these clinics, these guys are planning on making millions and millions and millions of dollars on this. And so when you have that, when there's that much money at stake, I see so many of these kind of documentaries and stuff now as kind of commercials, they're paving the way and, getting the mainstream on board.
Right.
And,
right. So I find the intersection of Aldous Huxley and Maria Sabina to be really interesting, because that's who initiates Huxley into the mushroom and into peyote. I think mescaline was what Huxley, mescaline, right?
Yeah, mescaline, yeah.
Yeah, right. And Maria Sabina, right?
Yes. Now, hang on. I'm just going to grab this. Do you know who Jan Irvin is? Jan Irvin runs Gnostic Media. And
I do know of Jan Irvin, yes. Right.
he's very, very interesting, bright man. And so he just wrote a book called God's Flesh, Teo Nanakato, The True History of the Sacred Mushroom. And I'm almost finished reading that. And he's talking about Gordon Wasson and how he was working with MK Ultra, and that Wasson and his wife, when they were speaking of this sort of mushroom cult within the Mexico and that area, that they left out all the accounts by the Spanish who were
Yeah,
about,
yeah. John gets into how bloody and just
it was a death cult. They were
absolutely
sacrificing people,
right.
and the mushrooms weren't used in the way that they were sort of presented as this sort of, way of going in and speaking with the gods. So there's a lot of muddying of the waters, to say the least, with all the sort of history. That said, Maria Sabina, I love her beautiful chants, and when she would work with the mushroom, which was used for healing, but they selected her among a number of people and kind of decided, all right, she is going to be the one we feature, and we're going to create this whole story around her, and ended up really kind of ruining her life in a big way, because all these hippies showed up there and it was a mess.
So Huxley turns on with Maria Sabina, and out of that comes the Doors of Perception, which is all about his relationship with psychedelics and what he's trying to uncover about psychedelics and how they work and how it affected, his consciousness. But then you also have Huxley, who's one of the main players of the Fabian Society, and creating a world based on this vision that these elites have for the rest of the world. And then he writes Brave New World, and he includes Soma in Brave New World, so that the masses could be somaticized, right? And kept in a state of kind of low-level bliss, and dumbing down. And so fast forward, right, we have the World Economic Forum and Davos, which one could make a case that they're an extension of the Fabian Society, a group of elites, right, who are trying to socially engineer the planet. And then you have the rise of entheogens coming into this discussion at a very high level, which again kind of mirrors this Huxleyan narrative about a society that is mediated and medicated by a substance which keeps people at this kind of low level of bliss. And I'm wondering if this is part and parcel of where they want to take this thing, right? And maybe it starts off with microdosing, which apparently Jack Dorsey does quite a bit, or mushroom therapy, right? But then at some point, because they're in control of the process, they say, we've discovered this wonderful new chemical that allows people to live in this state of awareness for a much longer period of time. And then they make this thing public and available, and it becomes like the new sacrament. And I think to get to that place, they have to bring people along so that it can begin to have some kind of mainstream acceptance. And when you look at Pluto and Aquarius, which is where we're going, I could see where because if this is a marker of the end of the Piscean age, right, and we're now moving into this intense transformation of the Aquarian age, then the Piscean religions have to go. You have the three Abrahamic faiths at some point have to go. And then there's a new religion, right? There's a new faith. There's a new sacrament. And I feel like that this is kind of what they're cooking up, right? And it kind of blends into the Huxleyan world of Soma and the Brave New World, some type of picture of a certain type of consciousness, right? Maybe not one that blows the roof off your head and you look around and you go, this is all bullshit and a lie, but one that keeps you in line and gets you to think and feel that the world that you're living in is actually better than it is. So I'd love your thoughts on that, because it really feels like they're pushing this thing. And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if they trip at Davos. I bet you they do. I bet you some of these elites get together and have their little mushroom experiences or the MDMA experience. Anyway, that's a side commentary.
Well,
but I'd love your thoughts on kind of this creation of a Soma religion, right?
Okay, but first to your point about those guys tripping, if indeed they do, it would just go to show, as I've seen anyway over the years, that just because you do mushrooms or ayahuasca, doesn't mean you're going to be, a nice and enlightened, grounded person.
We need to talk about that, because to me, that is so paradoxical. But keep going. I want to follow up on that.
And then I was also going to say, they would have to come up with some kind of chemical like that for their world that they are creating, because it is so horrendously dystopian.
Right.
You would need something just to cope, because just as when wild animals are, kept contained, they don't do as well, right? And so, we have a wildness to us, and we still have instincts, and they're dulled in a lot of people, but still, we've been domesticated, so much so as a people. I was just having a conversation with a woman this morning about our warriors, and how our good men have just been practically
castrated.
Yes, absolutely. Emasculated, and how that's happening to our young men as well. And I've heard stories from, different clients tell me, their 14-year-old son gets just completely emasculated by some woke 17-year-old girl, and so mean, right? And so anyway, that world is an absolute horror show. And it's really on us to do what we can to undermine that in some way. So, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. So get me back on track, Robert.
So we were talking about the new sacrament, right?
Oh, the new sacrament, right.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, they've normalized, even just medicating yourself. And they've been doing that, I think, since the 50s, with all these different sort of drugs that, mom or dad would take and sort of settle them down, and of course be very addictive. And that actually that goes way beyond that, because opium used to be in cough medicines back in the day, in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So, medicating and kind of dulling the senses has been encouraged and normalized. And now we have all these people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety, and it's always drugs. Drugs are always the answer, which is why it's so important to say, listen, mushrooms can be amazing. They can also, really screw you up if you're not kind of wired for that kind of thing.
Right.
But we're also creatures we're very ritualistic. Like even one's morning coffee or matcha tea, it's a whole ritual that you do every morning, people don't even sort of realize that. And so they would have to, again, yes, create something like that where you take it daily and whatever, and it brings you into a certain state.
Right. It's like, I'm going to feel at one with nature when I consume my cricket milkshake, right? It brings me into a state of oneness at the basement level or ground level. I just find it really interesting that there are people who you would think through a consistent or protracted or in-depth use of psychedelics and entheogens, that they would wake up, right? That they would wake up and they would see the illusion, and that proved to be a completely erroneous theory during COVID, when you had a lot of these people who had been switched on, who are just banging the drum and, singing Pfizer's praises, right? Or singing Moderna's praises over the last 3 years. To me, that's really mind-blowing. Can you give me some insight into why you think these people have these, mind-cracking experiences and then come back and just bang the drum for the mainstream?
Well, I early on, so maybe after a couple of years of doing the mushrooms, and I'd written my book, and so I spoke at just a few conferences. But I remember talking to different people at those conferences, and by the way, they were always sort of academics. And I'd be scratching my head thinking, are we talking about the same thing? Like, are you sure you've done the mushroom? Because I was also studying law at that time. I got into a deeper study, not lawyer law, but the deeper tenets and the biblical principles. And so I'd be sort of talking a little bit about this, and they just would not even and I'm thinking, wait a sec though, like the mushroom, isn't it supposed to really sort of open our mind and kind of snap us awake and help us to see, this great facade before us, and no. And I think also people, I don't think, of course, they're very indoctrinated. All the media is addictive for people, which I never understood. I've never been a TV person anyway, but whenever I see any kind of news, whatever, I always ask, what are they trying to get me to believe now? Like, I can see right through it, but a lot of people can't. I also didn't end up going to college, so I didn't have those 4 years of further indoctrination, because that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't have that, but people did. And then they sort of, they look to certain sources for their news and their information and opinions, and they don't even realize that the opinions that they have been put in there. Like, there's no independent thinking, there's no critical thinking. And then the whole COVID deal really emphasized this, like, we're all in this together, and this is for the greater good, which is collectivism. And so, a friend of mine in Nova Scotia said something I never forgot with the whole COVID and then the masks, and she had a little shop, and she was beloved by the people of that town, and they go in there and sap all her energy and tell her their problems and talk to her for hours. And she's just a gem. And so she said, you know what, there's no one's going to have to wear a mask when they come in my store. Good grief, it's fine. And the entire town turned on her. And she said something that I think really sums up these past 3 years. She said, boy, when the masks went on, the masks came off.
Right.
So this birthed an army of petty tyrants. And so the psychedelic world is no different. People are people. And so you have people, like in that realm as well, who are like, you can't, if you're going to come, you have to be tested, and don't think this. And if you, and just like, I mean, I just kind of laugh because I can see the petty tyrant. I'm like, oh my God, wow. And also, for myself, all that, the whole sort of medical model negates everything I stand for as a medicine woman. I'm about working with the medicines of the earth, but you saw like herbalists and all these people and medicine people who they seem to stand for that, but then they gave it all away. They let it all go, to step into, that whole reality. And
it's really mind-blowing. I think my takeaway is that predispositions and kind of deeply held personal patterns, they're there, and in many instances they will not change. And you can have an incredibly powerful like DMT trip or whatever, but those predispositions are more than likely to stay in place. I mean, that's my takeaway, because I was always who I was before I began to experiment with psychedelics and hallucinogens. So I was already the outsider. I was already somebody who, you know, unlike you, I didn't try to fit in, right? I was, and it's neither good nor bad. It was just how I was wired. So that didn't really change me. You know, it didn't break me down and go, oh, maybe I should drop my predisposition and, you know, join the circus. It didn't do that. You know, but it gave me different levels of awareness and seeing things and some understanding. But I was pretty much who I was before as I was after in a lot of ways. So it's a really interesting piece around the medicine work and this whole idea that people have these predispositions, and I think it can be quite rare for them to just completely get blown up and see the world from a different perspective.
Yeah, and I did in high school and junior high. I desperately wanted to fit in. Like I tried, oh my God, like I
Right.
tried so hard to absolutely no avail. And that is very freeing though, because it opens up avenues then for exploration that no one else is going down that avenue, and no one cares if you do or not, you
Right.
know. So you are exposed to much more than if you'd been kind of one of the gang.
Right.
And so, and I realize I'm an Aries woman also, so that's very independent, you know. And it's really, I think it's saved my life. And because I can stand on my square. That's another thing. I'm very much an autodidact. I love to learn. And because I ask, what are they trying to get me to believe now? I like to go deeper. Okay, that's the surface story. And that's how I work with my clients. They give me the situation of what's going on in their life. Well, to me, that's symptomatic of it's a part of a pattern. So then I'm going to reverse engineer that back to, you know, usually childhood. Where did that pattern originate? What's the origination point of that? So I want to go deeper into, well, what's really going on? And what are they not telling us? Because they're always holding back, you know, and we're in duality. So there's the story for the muggles, and then there's what's really going on. And that's just a few. And I'm like, I want to know what you guys are up to, you know, and also the social pressure, the pressure to fit in and be like everyone. And of course, you know, I experienced that in high school, but again, didn't work for me. But you know, it's all around us. And you know, so the individual is the enemy in terms of what they are endeavoring to create worldwide. And you know, and they're making freedom, you know, seem like something utterly selfish and you know, outmoded. So
well, freedom, if you follow the cookie crumbs, right, leads to things like white privilege, colonialism, right? That's where this whole thing is going. Oh, freedom. That's a luxury.
Right.
It's a luxury you people have. You know why? Because there were other people that were not free at your expense. Right. That's going to be weaponized, I guarantee you.
Well, it already is.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've also been saying, Robert, that like they've timed this accordingly because they had to get people ignorant and kind of stupid, a number and
submissive.
Submissive, exactly, before they would implement certain ideologies even. And those come in a very crafty way, you know, and you've spoken with the Krimis and, you know, about, you know, the Frankfurt School and so many superb podcasts on that subject. But anyway, so yeah, they've had to dumb people down. And the thing is, another thing that Jan Irvin I learned from him was the trivium. And the trivium is grammar, logic, rhetoric, and in that order, because the grammar is the words you're either reading or hearing. The logic is your ability to be able to parse through those words and see, is there any contradiction in this person's argument? You know, which no one does. not no one, but you know what I mean? Very, very few people do that. And so in order to do that, you need to know what the logical fallacies are. And those are fallacious arguments. And they're in both Latin and English, which tells you this is very old, this understanding. And then the rhetoric is your ability to be able to speak now to that subject, you know, and our children in schools and we as well, we're not taught how to think. They're taught what to think.
Right.
So people don't have the ability to even arm themselves against the propaganda and this assault of it's such an assault. Oh, you're this and you're that. And it's all ad hominems, by the way. If they don't like your opinion, or if you just, you know, you venture something to say, you know, you're called names, those are ad hominems. And so I'll quickly say in mid 2020, when all the, you know, sort of COVID hysteria was rising, I put in, someone sent me an article. I don't even remember what the article was about. It was basically saying that that the whole sort of COVID hoopla was the greatest hoax of the century. You know, it didn't say COVID itself, it just said all this sort of hoopla around it. And I read, I was like, yeah, this writer's got a good point, some good points here. So I just sort of threw it up on my casually on my Facebook. Oh my God. It was like a nuclear bomb went off on my Facebook page. But it was interesting because, oh my God, people were just attacking and calling me names and like hurling. And I was reading through and I'm like, ad hominem, appeal to authority, ad hominem. Like I was just able to. So what it did was, you know, it helped me sort of remove the personal attack. Because also what happens with people is they get called all these names and they're like, they abandon their argument over here. And now they're over here going, no, I swear I don't, you know, and it's like, wait a sec, that person's reactive. And it's also understood that if you're in a proper argument, as soon as emotion enters, we're done. Because when you're in emotion, you can't access the higher order thinking. And so I actually took myself off Facebook because, you know, I had this sense like, you know what? Well, first of all, I realized, oh my God, like there's a hysteria here. Like people are in a, this is, I had never experienced that before. And so it came to me, you know what, God has blessed me because of what I do for a living. I have plenty of people who come. My business is probably 90% word of mouth. You know, someone comes, they want their spouse, their friend, whatever, you know, it's been that way for all these years. So I was like, I don't need to be out there. And I like left all that. And I'm not on any social media. You know, I have a YouTube channel, but you know, something came to me like, you know what, you just need to be quiet, do your work quietly, like the medicine woman or man does anyway. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, I kind of see myself as the person at the edge of the forest, got to kind of make the way over to them. And anyway, so yeah, so that was intense. And then I also stopped doing my newsletter, which I'd done for like 12 years. And I waited a couple of years. And then in January of 2021, I put a newsletter out and I spoke a little bit to like this sort of collective psychosis that's going on. And I got, for the first time in whatever, 12 years, hate mail. And you know what was very interesting though? I got 3, you know, quite striking responses. Not a one of them signed their name. Not a one of them had the merit of character to sign their name. Mm-hmm. So, you know, delete, because I'm certainly not going to, you know, dignify that with a response. But, you know, this is also where we're at. And we're at a time, there's the meanness, the casual cruelty is just absolutely shocking. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, one would hope psychedelics could help with that. Because certainly when I would go in to the mushroom, especially those early first few years, would often get a little bit of this at the end of the journey, you know, but done with such love, but saying, you know, you could have couched that differently, or, you know, so-and-so's over here, and, you know, just saying, you know, Shonagh, you got to shift this. And I would come out of that and I would make it right, you know, and that's that humility of like wanting to be a better person, because that's really all I've ever wanted, is to better myself, you know, and on many levels. And, this whole internet, it's given people this sort of false sense of, I don't know, authority and cruelty, and, and they can be anonymous and they can sort of do and whatever. It's quite appalling. But again, if you learn that trivium and you learn those logical fallacies, and then you can take that step away and you see what that person's doing, and you're like, you know what? This person doesn't have the intellectual rigor to even like have a discourse.
Right.
Have a proper, intellectual discourse where we can, God forbid, agree to disagree.
Right.
Like, I don't care if someone's had the jab or doesn't have the jab or whatever. Like, we're in choice, hopefully, so far.
Right. So far. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So an example of this idea of personal predisposition before and after the trip or the journey popped into my head while we were talking. And I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's a really striking example. So there's this semi-famous story of the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn and all those people that were, these radicals from the 1960s that were hell-bent on, being a destructive force inside of the system, right? To the point where I think they placed bombs in government buildings and some people died, right? They stormed the meeting between them and SDS, and they wound up taking over the anti-war movement. So there's this story where they were driving from Wisconsin to Chicago for the Democratic Convention, the famous Democratic Convention in 1968. And on their way down from Wisconsin to Chicago, they were in this van, right? Somebody was driving the van, but the bulk of them were in the back of the van. And they were all high on acid, and they were all naked and entangled in this kind of orgiastic preparation of their, radical march on the streets of Chicago, right? So now you have LSD, and then you have this kind of polyamorous field that they're, commingling with, right? Participating in. But they were the same people after that event. And I guarantee you that probably wasn't the only time they ever did psychedelics during that period, right? So you would think that maybe these handpicked, potentially alphabet agency elite radicals would go through this experience and on the other side say, man, we just took the lives of 3 or 4 people, and man, we can't do that. But that's not the case at all, right? They were who they were going in, and they were who they were on the other side of it. And
yes. And I will say also, Robert, my experiences with the mushroom, like everyone's experience is really unique to them. There's no sort of standard, like, oh, just because you do the mushroom, you're going to be this kind of person and you're going to have these kind of experiences.
right.
Yeah. And, and someone with a black heart or who's just like utterly corrupted they're not going to be moved by that. And who know, they're not going to be touched by that necessarily for the most part. Right. I mean, I've seen it too many times myself.
Yeah. All right. I want to bring in a little bit of levity here for a minute, and then see if we can do a little commentary on this thing I'm about to play. And then we'll go deeper into your world too. So let me do this. Then we're going to talk about also a very interesting form of healing.
Oh, yes. I know we have a lot to talk about today.
We do. It's a good thing we're going to be here for another hour.
Okay. All right.
All right. So let me play this. Some people have seen it. If you haven't seen it, be prepared to be strangely entertained. Okay. So this is one of the musical acts for the World Economic Forum. And when you see this and listen to this, I think you'll get a better understanding of just how geeky and dweeby these people are. And so here, let me just play it and enjoy it in all of its strange glory.
Like a flower or a tree, I'll throw my head back and sing, I sing, I sing, I sing, I sing. L'uaiti est a bella so bella.
I mean, on a certain level, you can tell this woman has talent. Like, she can sing, she's got great range. She's a hell of a whistler at the end. But this is just so geeky. And, she's got the rainbow dress on. And it's like, okay, is this the entertainment of the future? Is this where the World Economic Forum is taking us? I mean, maybe it's a few steps up above gangster rap, okay? But it's just so odd. Right. It's so odd. And
It just does. I don't think it's so much odd. Like, her voice is beautiful.
Beautiful voice. Yeah.
I could see that at like a festival, and there's jazzy tone to her. But just at the World Economic Forum, I think I see it more as them trying to paint themselves and make themselves available, to a certain crowd. And it's just more of their way of sort of manipulating, to get more and more people to be like, oh my God, God, these guys are they're so relatable. They're so,
so hip and jazzy and organic.
Exactly. So,
right.
Artists aside, I just don't buy anything that they put forth, that we're talking about pure evil at the end of the day. Absolutely, that is what they stand for, pure evil. And I read an interview with Yuval Noah Harari,
who I think would be considered clinically insane. If clinically, and nobody ever calls him on any of his crazy ideas. They all just sit there and go, oh.
Right, but he's the advisor to Satan Claus. And so, right. and I just think of him as a demon spawn. But, he was interviewed in The Guardian, and he talked about how in the 1900s, we had the birth of the working class, and how this 21st century would now be the birth of the useless class. And he said billions of people are going to be just utterly useless because they won't have any kind of military function. And he said we should be able to feed and clothe these people. But he said, in terms of deciding sort of what to do with them, he said that will be the political discussion. And so, first of all, who decides who's useless? Obviously they're playing God, a very dark God. And also, excuse me, this is a discussion of politics to decide our fate, excuse me. Anyway, so the whole thing is, it's very dark. And I will say, though, I gotta say, Robert, more and more people are waking up, and more people than we can possibly imagine. And I went to get my hair cut the other day, and I've got this adorable young woman. She's all of 22. And she cuts my hair, and she cuts my daughter's hair. And oh my God, we had a discussion. I was shocked. She said, did you see the video? And I'm like, I don't watch any of that stuff. And she said, well, I'm telling you, because it was really satanic. And I was like, what? And I said, the whole industry is satanic. And she said, I know, I've been thinking that because this and this. and she hasn't had the jab, and I mean, this young lady was awake and I was utterly unprepared for the conversation that we had. I mean, delighted, but just like, wow, people in the least likely places are seeing this. They're seeing. So they may have dumbed down and put a lot of people into compliance. And the beautiful thing about humanity is we are unpredictable. You know, you just can't contain all of us. People are too different. And as you well know, because, you know, just do someone's chart and do someone else's chart, and you're like, whoa, you know, like just the differences are so striking. And so, you know, some can be contained, some want to be contained, but a great many don't. And I think they already have a fight on their hands. There's news that we're not hearing at all, like the farmers in the Netherlands and, you know, people standing up. That's not going to stop. That's going to continue. And I also feel it's very, very important that people learn even just the foundations of law, you know, the tenets of law, the maxims of law. For my little podcast that I just started, it's called The Mushrooms Apprentice. And I just did. So what I do is one solo episode, 2 interviews, solo, 2 interviews. So it gives me time because I put a lot into my solo presentations. And so I did one on law. And so the first hour is free. The second hour is for subscribers. And then on YouTube, I have a YouTube under The Mushrooms Apprentice and a YouTube under Shonagh Home. So you can listen to that first hour. The maxims are really potent because if people even knew that, which we should have been taught as young children, we can't be lied to. Because one of the maxims says the burden is on he who affirms, not he who denies. Yeah, because if you're making a claim, you better damn well be able to back it up. And if people knew that one, I've said propaganda wouldn't work because people are like, wait a minute, back that up, buddy. Where's your proof? And don't tell me to just follow the science. That's an appeal to authority.
Right.
A fallacious argument. You know what I mean? Like just a few things for us to arm ourselves with. You know, there's a reason why the education is so deplorable, because if we have this, then we can't be lied to. So I really we have so much power, so much untapped potential within us. It's amazing, amazing, amazing. I hope in my lifetime I see these guys go down in flames.
I think it's not only going to happen, I think it's starting to happen. And you know, once you shake the tree, it doesn't matter what side the tree is being shaken on, right? It's kind of like this ongoing, whatever this little pissy match turf war is between Steven Crowder and the Daily Wire, which you probably don't know much about, so Steven Crowder is one of the more popular YouTubers when it comes to like theoretical conservative politics and having a show, right? He's younger and he's got close to 6 million subscribers. And at one point he was part of the Blaze and left the Blaze. And then Daily Wire is Ben Shapiro's channel. So now they're in this pissing match because of something that Crowder brought up about a contract that was, or an offer that was brought to him by the Daily Wire. And the Daily Wire is known for being like the voice of conservatism, you know, here in the United States. But when you really drill down into the Daily Wire, they're really controlled opposition in a lot of ways. They'll give you 80% of the talking points, or maybe 75%. And then there's a really big 20% that they leave off the table. And not only leave off the table, but you cannot discuss it. So they could have somebody like Matt Walsh, who does a documentary about, you know, what is a woman, and he's very good at it. And he's very articulate at it. And, you know, if Matt stays in his lane, you know, he's quite good. And based on, you know, their modus operandi, he's not going to stray too far out of his lane. But the minute Matt Walsh would talk about something like dual citizens, being in our government, dual being that they have a relationship with the United States and Israel. I guarantee you, they would shut Matt Walsh down in a New York minute, right? Or if Matt Walsh wanted to talk about the Great Replacement and how we got word of the Great Replacement really early on, going all the way back to like 2015, when Barbara Lerner Specter went to Europe and said, Europe is no longer going to be what it was. Europe is going to be moved into diversity. And she clearly says this, and it will be the Jewish people who will do this, and they will be resented, but it's a price that they're going to have to pay. Do you think Matt Walsh could comment on that? No, of course not, because he would lose his job there, right? As long as he stays in his lane, it's fine. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because normally you'd look at somebody like on the left, we'll use, I don't know, some dingbat, the Young Turks or whatever kind of mouthpiece that typifies the new left. And you could say, well, here's all these inconsistencies and hypocrisy that they spew every day. Well, now this thing is going to the other side as well, right? Now this thing is moving into these gatekeepers who are supposedly on the side of truth and freedom and justice. So to your point, like, things are happening, right? Things are getting shaken out, and it doesn't really matter, because truth has its own morality. And so we're starting to see this awakening, and it's taking some very interesting turns. And I know some people may have a bit of an issue with what I'm about to share, but even when it comes to Trump and his latest interview with the vaccines, or about the vaccines, and how he still stands by them, right? And every time he goes out on that ledge and doubles down, triples down, and quadruples down, that's going to have an effect on people who have this idea of medical body sovereignty, which is a foundation for, I think, all of us. They're going to look at that, and they're really going to reassess their relationship, with that person, with that movement. So I guess what I'm trying to bring to the table here is that what you're talking about doesn't care what side gets shaken out, right? It doesn't care because this is the process. This is what's happening. This is truth trying to break up these stratified forms, whatever they are.
Well,
and
truth is eternal.
Yeah.
It requires no defense. That's why I love the maxims of law, because there's true today as they were 10,000 years ago. Yeah. And then Yeshua said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Yeah, because truth is truth. And lies go in and out of lie comes, and then a lie goes, and then a new lie comes, and then a new, it goes. Right. The truth is eternal.
Yeah. So I just think the awakening process is fascinating, especially now, because at one point it was like, okay, well, this group is awake and this group is asleep. But now in the group that's supposedly awake, it's being shown and illustrated, a lot of these people aren't as awake and truthful as they've purported themselves to be. So it's just an aside, and I think it's a really, really interesting aside. Why don't we talk about this new discovery that has come into your life and the potential for it? So let me see if I can find the requisite web page that I have here. Hold on one sec. Here we go. George Lakovsky. Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring up the web page. Let's talk about George Lakovsky and how you discovered him, his work, and what kind of potential it might hold for us in the healing realm.
Okay. Well, I have a wonderfully eclectic group of friends, and one of them is my friend David. on the West Coast. And I always refer to him as my scientist physicist friend. And he is brilliant, really, really, really brilliant. And just a big love. And he just wants to help people. And so it's because of David that I learned of Victor Schauberger, of Royal Raymond Rife, and what's interesting is all these men were born around like the 1860s. Tesla, Schauberger, Rife, and Lakovsky, I think, was 69. And I see that time as like the almost like the crowning of the baby being birthed into the Aquarian age. That represents the true Aquarian age, because everything that these brilliant men were in touch with would bring our world together in the most extraordinary way. We would have free energy. We would be healthy. We would not have. So the digital technology. There's a man named Eric Dollard, and he is an electrical engineer. He's an older gentleman, and he is absolutely brilliant. And he is like, I don't know, the world's leading expert on the deeper layers of electricity. And I think he's like a modern day Tesla. And, he was saying that this digital piece that we're in, that is totalitarianism, that is fascism, whereas electricity, they can't control electricity the way they can control the digital. And there were a number of people experimenting with electrobiological interfaces. There was a guy named Darzenval who actually collaborated. He was a French engineer, and he collaborated with George Lakovsky. And Darzenval was doing experiments back in 1893. And so George Lakovsky was a Russian scientist, researcher who was in Paris in the first half of the 20th century. And so, had worked with Darzenval, studied under him, and he was experimenting. He postulated that every cell oscillates, and that every cell really actually is a capacitor, in that it holds an electrical charge. And so, and also that cells can transmit and receive signals. And then we have radiation, just natural Earth radiation from the sun, like all around us, right? And so when the body gets diseased, it is the result of what he said was oscillatory disequilibrium, where that just perfect God-given equilibrium of the cells is disturbed now. And so you have all these microbes in there wreaking havoc. And so the cells are not able to oscillate at their highest, and they're weak. They're because every cell has a charge to it. So the charge is diminished, and then the microbes are able to take over, and you have disease. Well, he also discovered that soils, if you have soil that is like clay, very little to no minerals, people are going to be sicker in those areas because they're not receiving the radiation they need. So anyway, he started off his experiments with these copper coils. They were 30 centimeters in diameter, and they wouldn't meet fully. They would be sort of partially open, and he would inject geraniums with cancer so that they would grow tumors. And then he put these copper coils, because of course they conduct and they would pick up sort of the frequencies around them. And he put a copper coil around one of the geraniums. And within a month, the tumors that had developed had dried up and fallen off. And so he continued his experiments, and he developed this device called a multi-wave oscillator, which is not a medical device. It's an electrical device. And so there is a box. I think I sent you a picture of.
Yeah, I pulled it off here. Let me.
It looks like a stereo receiver, and it has a modified Tesla coil in it. And so it creates a charge that creates the frequencies that are then sent to these tubes that have copper coils in them. And then that is attached to these round circular antenna, and they're concentric copper circles. This is a version, those green the green circles are PC boards, and those were developed by Eric Dollard, who I mentioned earlier. And so what happens is, so that box that says Vril is the name of the company that produces these. And so it creates the charge, and it's carried through the copper coiled pieces there, and then it goes into those antennas. And what it does is it creates this field of oscillating frequencies. So you get frequencies from 750 kilohertz to 3 gigahertz, all those frequencies, and then harmonics all the way up to ultraviolet light. And so you sit within those green discs, antennas, and you're bathed in those frequencies. And then every cell in your body adjusts itself and uptakes those frequencies so that it is recharged like a battery. And there's a gentleman named Dr. Peter Lindemann, who's the world's leading authority on Lakovsky. And he said that this will bring you back, your cells, back to a level of quote unquote normalization on steroids. So Royal Raymond Rife, what he was doing is he was like a hunter in that he discovered the frequencies of these pathogens, and then he would use frequencies that would go after that pathogen. So like an opera singer who strikes a note and then the glass shatters, right? So that's what would happen to the pathogens. So that was how Rife was working. What Lakovsky did was, this was about just bathing the entire body in these harmonizing frequencies. And he built 54 of these machines so that there were doctors in Austria and Germany. He was in France, I think Spain, who were working with these, and they were all communicating. And so working on all these different patients. And so they cured like 98% of these cancers. They would take patients who would be lost causes, who would actually be turned away from other doctors. And if they weren't cured, they were brought to a state of equilibrium where they could finally function again, right? So and they were following the actual scientific method, and they were experimenting and repeating experiments and whatnot. And Lakovsky was just a consummate researcher. And what happened was World War II occurred, and he was a staunch anti-Nazi. And so he came to the US and he brought one of these devices with him, and they were doing experiments at a hospital in New York. And lo and behold, what a coincidence. He was, under suspicious circumstances, struck and killed by a car. And so a limousine, I think. So his son, Sergei, took it over for a while, but he didn't have the level of he wasn't known here in the way he was in Europe. So it all sort of very conveniently went away. And it wasn't until I think 2009 when one of these resurfaced in the home of a doctor. I think it was all crated up. So this was in Europe. And so they kind of reverse engineered it and got it going and began using these. Well, Eric Dollard, who I mentioned, who's in this country, he's been egregiously abused by the powers that be, like absolutely brilliant. And, he would set up these laboratories in different places, and then, they would take the whole thing apart, and, he was hit over the head and woke up in another state. And I mean, just like some really terrible things happened to him. And actually, to learn more about Eric Dollard, Greg Carlwood from the Higher Side Chats interviewed him 2 or 3 years ago. And I think that interview is still on YouTube. So it's a really good interview. And then also, if you type in Eric Dollard, there's a whole lecture. He gave a 4-hour lecture on the history and theory of electricity. And there's just a number of talks. And a lot of this stuff is like, woof, over the head. Like, I can't sort of do other things and listen. I have to sit down and really focus on what he's saying. But in any case, and Eric was living out of his car for a while, but this man's a national treasure. And so Aaron Murakami, who's an engineer, also very brilliant, and a few other of these guys got together with Eric, and he's been, I think he mentored them clearly, And so Eric came up with these green PC boards, and they do the exact same thing as the copper coils. So I really wanted to order one of these. And so after I sold my house this summer, then I purchased this, and there's nothing digital about this. It's all analog. Every machine is made by hand. It takes months to get. I ordered mine in June, and I just got it on Wednesday of this week. So I've only been in it a few times. I went in this morning. I went in twice yesterday, and I went in Wednesday afternoon. And by the way, my cat, usually she's sleeping off wherever during the day. When I go in this, she walks in the room and she jumps on my lap, and she wants to be in those frequencies. And of course, animals know, right? So you can go on vril.io to learn more about this. I'll tell you right now, they say absolutely nothing about what this can do. They're smart. They just say this is simply for research purposes. So I am looking forward to seeing what this can do. I have friends who have 3 kids. The older daughter has had sort of physical problems since she was born, health issues. The 19-year-old daughter has advanced Lyme. Then they have a 16-year-old son who's a fantastic athlete. So I'm actually going to keep it at their place for the first 3 months and see what it does for the whole family. And their mom's going to keep copious notes. Like, let's see what this baby can do for these kids, you know, and for myself as well. And I all I can say at this point is, you know, I went in twice yesterday and this morning, and you know, it's very meditative when you're in. Like, it's really, really relaxing, actually, even though that machine behind you is kind of loud. But you just go into this relaxed state. When I come out, I feel crystal clear, like crystal clear. So essentially what that machine does, Lakovsky imitated a lightning storm. So it's almost like the ions in the air after a storm. And you can smell ozone when you're in those frequencies. And my friend David has told me some very interesting stories. He had a buddy of his who has been a chain smoker his whole life. Like David said, oh God, he's just he's so unhealthy. But anyway, put him in this thing 3 times over the course of a weekend. And a day or 2 later, the guy kind of collapsed and he coughed up all this like black tar.
Wow.
Yeah, all this crap from his lungs. And when he got done with that, his wife was a little freaked out, but then he said he felt better than he had in years. And said, when can I go in there again? And then David just had a woman with COVID lung. She's 90 or 91, I think. And she's had that for over 4 months. And she had a half hour in that thing. And she's all better. Wow. So yeah, so electricity, we are electrical. Right. And the Earth's electrical. So you know, they were doing amazing things at the turn of the century. And in 1924, you know, we had the AMA, and the guy running the AMA had to step down because, you know, he was doing whatever illegal.
Well, he went after Hoxsey. Right. That was the story. He publicly went after Harry Hoxsey, who had these cancer clinics, and he defamed him in public via the newspaper, and Hoxsey sued him. That's why he had to step down.
Okay. Well, so then he put his buddy in place of him, and his buddy was Morris Fishbein, who was another, what I just call them demon spawn. And so Morris Fishbein ran the AMA from 1924 to 1950, and he just made it his mission to drive out any doctors who were doing any kind of good for people. So, you know, they destroyed Reif's reputation. Reif was brilliant, absolutely brilliant man. And ran them out of town, or they disappeared, or, you know, all kinds of things happened until they eradicated every possible avenue for actual healing. And you can see they're on another rampage now because they want to get rid of homeopathy and all supplements. And so they're trying to eradicate any way possible. And also, of course, our food. They're saying they want to put all this mRNA stuff in the food and inject animals with it. So, you know, what this does, though, is necessity is the mother of invention, as they say, right? And so I look at this like, you know what? I do my best work when my back is up against a wall, and I think a lot of people do, right? And so this kind of thing is going to be more. We're going to see more of this, and people. And by the way, the plans on how to make this they're out there. They're out there. You can figure this out. And I remember listening to another guy named, I think his name was John Prine, not the singer. And he was talking about Schauberger and all of the things that Schauberger was, all the inventions and whatnot, and all of his patents and a lot of the ways to create his inventions are missing. But he said, you have no idea how many garages are out there, with some engineer type who's figuring it out. You have no idea. And so this is going to birth, and this is the Aquarian age. I'm telling you right now, like, we're gonna figure our way through this. And I will not go to hospital unless whatever, I don't know, car crash or something, or I'm just taking on my deathbed. But other than that, no way, no way. So we have to figure out these other ways of how to sustain ourselves. And now this is a spendy, device. But I would say for those people who do want to look into it, if there's a will, there's a way. You could purchase this with someone else. Like my friend David purchased it with a friend of his.
Right.
And, so there's things like that we can do. But I'm very psychic. And there's certain things I know, and I know this is very important. And so I hope to be working with a lot of people in person with this over the course of this year and beyond. And certainly for people who come from my retreats, they can have a crack at it.
So how tall are these stands here?
The posts are 40 inches high. Okay. And then check this out, Robert. They have to be exactly, wait for it, 33 inches apart. Anyway, so yeah, 33 inches apart. So yeah, 40 inches high, give or take whatever, 3 inches diameter, 4 inches diameter of the tubes. And yeah.
So I have this theory, and it's not solely my own. Some other people share it. Some people, not a lot, but so I have this theory that this technology that we're looking at, like if you think about this whole idea of Tartaria and this other kind of world that was here, and there seems to be a lot of evidence that suggests that that's true, right? And you look at some of these pictures from these different periods of time that are kind of like either late 1800s or even before that a little bit, right? You'll see things that look strangely, I don't know, maybe similar to this in their own way. Like, what is that? What is it doing? Why? And I think that this technology was probably already there to some extent. Yes. And whether it's Tesla or Rife or your guy George here, either they're piggybacking on that stuff, right, and trying to refine it, or maybe they're just flat out like appropriate. I don't know the real answer to that, but then you have these guys like the AMA and the Rockefellers, and they come along and they're like, okay, we're going to gain control of these things. And then when you look at like the 1900s, where you have what they call the second industrial revolution, a lot of that stuff is like medical technology, but it's not anywhere sophisticated like this, right? Like iron lungs and, and I think not long after that, they started to play around with like X-ray devices. And so it's almost like, okay, we're going to take some of the principles of these devices and these machines, but we're going to either limit them or we're going to make it so that it's not necessarily liberating, but it may it may affect a condition for a brief period of time, but you'll have to come back, right? So when I look at this and I think of these technologies, I think of like, well, what are the Rothschilds sitting on in their warehouses, right? What are the Rockefellers sitting on in their, and I guarantee you'll find stuff like this.
Of course
Yeah,
you will.
yeah.
In fact, when was it David Rockefeller, when he invested all that money into the universities to get their particular medical model with these synthetic pharmaceuticals in place and get rid of the homeopathy schools, his family continued to receive homeopathy.
Right. That's a famous story. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so does the Queen. Well, she's dead now, but that family has their own, homeopathy, doctor of homeopathy, and so they'll continue with that, but the rest of the sort of common folk have to get what they're given.
And the cool thing is that you've agreed to bring this machine out to our event, which
Well,
could
hopefully, I'm afraid
hopefully.
to promise, but I would like to bring it. We'll see. I
Okay.
would very much like to, because I'd love for people to be able to experience it.
Okay. Well, if you can, that'd be great. And if you can't,
Yeah.
I'm sure we'd understand. So,
Yeah.
So one of the things that I also wanted to go over here. So you've got one side of your brain, like really scientific and developed and, kind of locked into these technological and advanced healing modalities. And then you have another side of your brain that is really creative and really receptive. And you've written a book of poetry, which are basically transmissions from the mushroom world. And our good friends, the Crimmies, are going to republish all your books, including the one that we're talking about now. And you've agreed to read a couple of your transmissions from the mushroom world. I think that'd be a really good segue to kind of take us up to the top of the hour and begin to wind down our show. So you want to tell people a little bit about that, and then we'll get into a couple of readings here.
Yes. Well, I'll say first that, so I'm Scottish Irish, so I'm a Gael or a Celt. And so we had the Druids, who were the learned caste, and the bards, and the training was a big deal. It took like 20 years to be a Druid, I think 15 to be a bard. And so they were, the bards were known as like a doctor of poetry, essentially. And then there were the Fili, F-I-L-I, and a Fili is a seer poet. And so what happened with me, I had those first few years of intense work with a mushroom, and then poetry started to flow in. And it really got going after a trip to Scotland. There's a man named Freddie Silva, who is one of the leading authorities on crop circles and sacred sites. And he hosts these extraordinary tours where it's only 6 people. And somehow his email, I don't remember signing up, but somehow an email came in my feed from him about a trip to the Outer Hebrides of Scotland to follow the path of the Templars. And he's a photographer, and his photography is beautiful. And so I don't even remember reading the text. I don't even think I read much of the text, but I saw those photos of stone circles, and every hair on my body stood on end. And I knew I have to go. I'm going to this. So I got my deposit in, and I got in. And so I was, I think, 52 at the time. And I had just barely begun doing the retreats. And I go off there, and we went to, the first place was the Isle of Lewis. And that's where there's a huge stone circle called Callanish, and the stones are massive. And before we went to Callanish, we went to these 3 smaller stone circles. So when you go on my website, the opening photo was a photo Freddie Silva took, and it was, thank you. Yeah, he's good. And so I was in the center of that stone circle, and I was just like, I just sort of had my hand over my heart. And also those stone circles, they're all built on ley lines. So there's a lot of electromagnetic energy there, and it actually affects the growth of plants, and that's a whole other discussion. But of course, we go in and we're going to be affected as well. And so when I was in the center of that circle, I felt this tall, I'm not clairvoyant, but I felt tall male being next to me, and he put his hand out, and he had this golden orb in his hand, and and I reached out and I took it, and I knew there's a backstory with this. Actually, can I just give you a quick backstory, because back to the Yucatan. I was co-leading a little tour in the Yucatan with Miguel and Hal, and of 10 people, and I said we're going to go to Palenque towards the end of it, and I said, hey Miguel, could you take the people in that sort of morning tour? I want to talk to the Red Queen, because at Palenque, there was Lady Zakuk Kuk, and she's called the Red Queen because her tomb was all painted red. And she was said to have been queen there in like 1100 years ago or something like this. And she was known for going into high trance states and giving prophecy. And she's definitely eating mushrooms. And so I had a little mushroom with me, and I went off to a quiet place in Palenque, and I just ate a little mushroom. I had a big wide brimmed hat and glasses and water, and I was just ready to just kind of go inward, which is what I did. And I go in, and this sort of huge spirit jaguar leaps over me first, and then this huge bat is in front of me, and that's one of their gods. Then these dark spirits came, and I said to these guys, I said, I'm here to see the Red Queen. I don't want any trouble. So go figure. But anyway, they disappeared. And then this woman's face, and she was sort of in profile, and she was eyeing me, and she had this massive headdress of feathers. And in between each feather was a serpent. And so they were eyeing me. She was eyeing me, up and down. And I knew by then, I'd been on enough mushroom journeys because I was speaking to these spirits. And so when I would go in, I'd just open my heart, because I always joke that your rap doesn't work with the spirit world because they can read you perfectly. And so I just kind of opened my heart to her. And then I started a conversation, and I asked her, I said, why is there still so much suffering in this world? Why? It hurts my heart. It's exactly what I said. And she said, the answer is not why. The answer is how. How are we going to heal this? And she said, it begins with gestures of kindness. You have no idea what a kindness will do for another. And she went on about that. And then I said, typical Shonagh, I said, I don't think the New World Order oligarchs are going to respond to gestures of kindness. You got to know what we're dealing with here. And she said, it is not for them. It is the common people who are suffering.
Yeah.
It's the common people who will respond to a kindness. And she said, your world is run on fear. And she said, something like, you wouldn't even recognize a deity if it were right in front of you. And at some point, because my medicine is owl, so I have owl wings and talons and everything I've had for years. My girls grew up with like owl wings and freezer and mushrooms and whatever. Anyway, so at one point she plucks a feather from her headdress and she extends her hand to me. And so I actually reached out and I took it and I held it. And then I had a moment of doubt. And I thought, wait a minute, what if there's something attached to this feather? Or what if this isn't even the Red Queen? What if this is like a spirit imposter? Like I didn't know. And so I handed it back. And I said to her politely, I said, I will be in my light and you in yours. And in that moment, I was in this cylinder of just crystal clear light. And then I had the clarity and I realized, you idiot, that's the Red Queen. She gave you a feather and you gave it back. And my eyes flew open and I realized in that moment, in my search to find a quiet place, I had located myself directly across from the only face left on the main pyramid. Like it shocked me. And she said through the face, yes, it is I. And now I've realized like I fucked up and I burst into tears. And I brought offerings anyway. So I got up and I walked bawling to the pyramid. And then I went up and I gave the offerings. And then I said, I speak the language of the heart. And she said, as do we, dear, as do we. And so then I'm looking for Miguel Angel, bawling, where's my teacher? And he's at a cafe with Trudy and this other guy, and she runs the tour group. And anyway, I'm bawling, like, and they're like, what the hell? And so I sit down and I told him what happened. And God bless him, such a good teacher. And he put his hand on my hand. And he said, Shonagh, maybe you're not ready to carry the feather of a Mayan queen. And your deeper wisdom knew that, and then when I went to bed, I woke up in the morning, and when you're so upset, as soon as you wake up, right? It's the first thing I thought of, and I start crying again. And her voice came in my head and she said, dear, I knew you wouldn't take the feather. Now go home and write. In other words, so I got my own lesson about my doubt, all this stuff. And anyway, when I left Palenque, I knew I would never be back. I just knew I'm done. I'm complete with all the good teachings here. And then I had a mushroom journey a few months later, and the being said to me, daughter, it's time for you to explore your own magical bloodline. You are a Celt. And that's all they said, because that's all they do. They just give me a little bits. And so then when Freddie's email came through days after that, I knew I'm in. So anyway, so here I am. And so then now we're back to the stone circle, and that being hands that to me. I'm like, these are my peeps. I'm taking that, so of course I graciously, I took the orb and I put it into my heart center. And even that gesture, just like the Red Queen, they didn't put it in me. They simply handed it. I was in choice, right? I chose. And so as soon as I put that in me, I felt like I had some kind of device in me. And after that, I began pouring forth poetry. And thank God I brought my digital recorder. And so I just speak into the digital recorder, and I mean, no mushrooms needed, just pouring through, and all these extraordinary high voltage sites that we were visiting, and it came through. And then the plane ride home from Glasgow to first Chicago, I channeled poetry for 7 hours straight, just like writing. And then the next day, after I got a little sleep, I had this sense like, I think I brought them home with me. And then for the next 3 months, I began channeling, and they would come in as I was awakening. So you're in that kind of liminal state. And I would have to bring my digital recorder to bed with me. And it was like taking dictation. And there were a couple of, I call them humdingers, like really long messages that came through. One's called Old Spirits Speak. The other is called Stone Circle Whispers. And by the way, I just a few months ago began recording them and putting them to music and video. So if you go on Mushrooms Apprentice on YouTube or Shonagh Home on YouTube, you will see those videos of the channeled poetry. And they're beautiful. Like, I don't write like that, but it would just come through. But when the really long ones, one came in the morning, and then I had to make Serena, my daughter, breakfast. And then I had to take her to school. And so it stopped for me. And then when I got back home, it resumed. It picked right up where it left off. So it's like taking dictation. And then when I am on the mushroom, I just hit record on the recorder. And the first thing that happens is this energy comes through me. My hands go into spontaneous mudras. And then, and then these strange sounds come out that I can't make otherwise. And then comes the poetry. And it's the she, and then different beings will speak, but in perfect rhyme. I'm not going, what rhymes with? No, there's no.
It just comes.
It just comes. And so, and then it will come without the mushroom. But again, this is not something that I can like churn out and post on Instagram every morning. That's not how it works. And so since I moved to Virginia, I do a 5-mile walk every morning. And I had 3 days in a row because I bring my digital recorder, because I don't want to ever bring a cell phone. I hate that thing. So I bring my digital recorder. It has recordings of different talks I want to listen to. And, but anyway, I had it. So something came in, a message, and I had 3 days of beautiful messages. So I recorded those. And, but then the 4th day, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for another one. Nothing, zero. So either the signal's there or it's not.
Right.
So anyway, so yeah, so I will quickly say, let me find this, that they gave me a warning in my a journey I took in 2018 about sugar. So I am now off sugar, I'm off wheat. And remind me also, just want to give just a little heads up to the listeners about sort of self-care in terms of keeping ourselves really healthy and strong moving forward. But in any case, so they said to me, oh, and awful sugar there, daughter, you must be aware, healthy bodies we do. They said, another evil we won't sow, healthy bodies we do grow. So I went off sugar for a year. And then whatever happened, you know, and that stuff is just so damn addictive. But anyway, so then I was, not that I'm eating it every day or anything, but you know,
right.
So then I did a journey in 2019, and then this is where I was with the fairy queen, and that also has been made into a little video. But this is one thing she said, you know, dear, what you must do. Let the sugar go. It's true. We told you once, we'll say again, let it go. It is a strain upon the good earth of this body. This is more than being naughty. This is part, dear, of their spell to make your good body unwell. Daughter, lies we do not tell. You will break free of that spell. This good body has more years. It's still a good ship you can steer.
Oh, I love it. It's great.
I love them so much. They're just so kind. Now, I did journey. I mean, I'll go into a few pieces here, but I journeyed the first day of this year. So just a couple of weeks ago. And I like to go in once a year. I mean, now with the retreats, I realize now I'm to be midwife because I don't have any, you know, a whole lot of time to go in by myself, which is fine. But anyway, they think of it as like a doctor's appointment, you know, like your annual checkup or check-in. And this journey, they said, this journey we will speak in plain English. They said the poetry comes later, but first a word from our sponsor. And they started with, again, essentially in law, you have first notice, second notice, which I got from the mushroom, from the fairy. Then you have notice of default, which this one was. Then you have the actual default, which I want to avoid. So they said, and this is not poetry, but they said, your body is a master intelligence, and so a gift to be in one. Yes, it is a temple. We are respecting this temple, and we're taking a look around in this temple and saying, the owner of this temple needs to do a little better job at cleaning and maintaining. We're making these observations as you would when you visit someone's home. You see something amiss, you might keep it to yourself, but of course, that is not our relationship, is it? No, we are observing and offering our helpful advice, dear. And again, you live in a world of choice. As you said yourself, you are just the delivery person. So we are delivering, dear, our good wisdom, which you have sought out, begins with a home, Miss Home. So got the memo. So like, all right, done. Yeah. So yeah, there's more. I don't know how much more you want me to read, but
read one more. 3 is a magic number.
Okay. I don't know how long I can go with this, but this was a journey. This was the annual journey I took for January 1st of 2022. And you know, some of this stuff is very personal. I don't share, but this other stuff I will. And anyway, so they said, daughter, to yourself be kind. We see worry in your mind. We see fretting and regret. That, dear, is a sticky net. You know you cannot change the past. To sail ships takes experience vast, accomplishments and mistakes too. All that lives inside of you. That is quite the cauldron's brew. It does inform and also stews. Daughter, you must pick and choose carefully what you hold and lose. Ride that wave you see so clearly. We will hold it for you dearly. You will walk this year with grace. With every step, you'll see her face. Daughter, look around you now. It's hard to imagine how, but this weaving just wove itself. That is the magic of the elf. Magic they don't want you to see. And so they've changed the scenery, but we are always just below. And what we carry so few know. To certain ones we do bestow the knowledge of how good seeds grow. A gentle journey today's ride. We'll hold you fast while we're inside. We are around you and below. Just call to us and we'll bestow the ways in which to stay in flow and ensure that awareness grows. We'll help you get out of their system. We'll say it's about to fall. You are finding the true wisdom. It is clear you've heard the call. Force is strong, we'll see you through. We'll help you with all that you do. This is how much we love you. You still cannot believe it's true. That's quite the spell they've cast on you. It will unbind, 'twill do so soon. That is why at this dark moon, we come in with greatest stealth to ensure you regain health. For this next passage you won't miss, and you will seal it with a kiss.
That's great. Wow.
Love.
That's, yeah. There's something very kind of Victorian about it.
Yes.
There's kind of a perfect order to it, but it's also very magical and fey. So, wow, those are really cool. And excuse me. So the Cremies, one more time, they're going to publish that. They're going to publish a collected volume of those poems.
Yes, I did like a self-published book, but it needed work, definitely, called Poetic Whispers from the Green Realms. This is where they abide. And so I talked to Steve about it. And so he would like me to add more of these sort of newer transmissions to it. So he's super busy. So
Right.
we'll get to this, I'm sure, by the spring and then have it come out maybe in the fall. We'll see.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think you're a great addition to their publishing house. And they're also a great addition to you as allies for your work. So perfect. So it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm so honored. I mean, their authors are superb. And I said to Steve, I said, I don't want to like bring down what you offer. He's like, are you kidding? He's like, stop it.
No, I mean, lately they've just been hitting it out of the park.
Oh my God. Yeah.
With their catalog and Elisa E's book, your stuff, Jean, I forget. I'm sorry, I spaced it out.
Yes, I read that book. Yes.
Right.
Uh-huh.
It'll come to me, but man, they're really
Walking with Alethea. Yeah,
so,
that was fantastic.
So there's a little bit of a promo for Logo Sophia books.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. On my podcast, which is themushroomsapprentice.com, at the bottom of every page, I just have, it says highly recommended. I don't get a cut from any of these people. And so Logo Sophia logo is there.
Right.
And who run Mush Love, and the different, just a few people. And Vril, who sells the multi-wave oscillator,
Right.
Yeah.
So speaking of your podcast, I heard that you have a really interesting guest that you interviewed. It's going to be on your podcast. Do you want to tell people about that?
Yes, of course. Yes, I got to interview you last week. And so it went live today. So the first hour is on YouTube, and the first hours are also on the homepage of the website. And then they can subscribe for the full 2 hours. And that was fantastic because the first 20, 25 minutes or so, I asked you first, how did you get into astrology? Because I'm always so interested, how do people get where they are?
Right.
And so just to hear you discuss the arc of your life, and also interesting that you studied these different systems, the runes and the I Ching and this kind of thing, and then found your way to astrology. And then you got into talking about Saturn, because there's so much of that influence today. And then the second hour, you got into what to kind of expect through 2023, really up to 2030, which I think is so important because astrology is a heads up. And you read for me 2 days ago. Your readings, you've been reading for me for a lot of years, are so astute. And what I love about you, Robert, is I was telling you in that interview how years ago, one of my teachers said to me, you're a black-eyed seer. You see the shit. And my medicine is owl, and owl sees in the dark. So sees what people can't see or won't see. You need that. And this is what you can do. And I just always was so struck how you would look at current events, but through the lens of astrology and your own psychic abilities, and be able to like put together, connect the dots. And I'd be like, damn, this guy's brilliant, you know? And so I am so honored and thrilled to be able to have you as part of what I offer. And what I see my podcast as is my, you know, really almost like maybe a kind of library of you know, that I've curated of certain people who I just think you may not necessarily hear of otherwise, you know, who have tremendous wisdom to offer, and then my own research that I can put on there. And I have apprenticed myself to those teachers. And also, it's not just a psychedelic podcast, it's The Apprentice. So it's all these areas of what The Apprentice needs to know. And the Krimis will be on there as well in a month or so. I want them to talk about propaganda and mind control, because the apprentice or the initiate, you must be able to have eyes to see. And all these people who claim this and claim this, and yet, you know, whatever, they bought into. If you can't see, dear, you have some steps to take.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, making claims of kind of what you are and what you do. If you can't see that, good grief, it's right in front of your face. You know, and that's the thing too. Truth is hidden. It's right in plain sight.
Right.
And the highest sorcerer casts their spells for all to see.
Right.
I'm thinking so much. I keep thinking of Soros and Sauron from Lord of the Rings.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my latest takeaway, you know, I've been spending some time going back and watching the movie The Prestige with Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale about these two dueling magicians. Mm-hmm. And there's some really interesting themes in The Prestige about like magic, misdirection, setting up a trick, and there's so many interesting layers to that movie. And it's helping me sort of reassemble like what's going on in so-called reality through the eyes of looking at what we're in as at times a craftily staged performance that is based on illusion and misdirection, all the precepts and principles of a magic trick. Right. And when you start to look at it from that perspective, it's like, oh, that's interesting. So what are they really trying to do? What is the illusion really about? And so, yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting time that we're in, and we're evolving, we're growing. And I love the fact that, you know, the idea of the apprentice and the, you know, the first thought, best thought, the Zen mind, right? The beginner's mind. I think those are all really important tools, because for people like you and I who've been orbited in these circles for years, right? It's easy to like either get jaded or locked in an orbit, think, well, I know all the answers, right? I've spent all this time looking and digging and piecing together. And it's like, no, you don't, right? No, you don't. And when you think you do, that's when you get into real trouble, right? So it's important to have a corpus or a body of knowledge. But on the other hand, if you don't move off of that, it becomes a dead corpus and it becomes an anchor. So I love the fact that you have this ability to sit at, you know, the teacher's feet, or you know, that you are in this eternally learning process. I think it's really important and keeps it real. I mean, so that's what it does. It keeps it real.
Yeah, and fresh. And I reserve the right to change my mind. If I learn something and I realize, oh, you know what? Actually, I was wrong. Let me make that correction and share it with you. And here's why. Like, I think that's really important. So.
Yeah. For me, I had an epiphany a long time ago about the definition of humility. And it just came to me like one day, humility is the state of being open. That's really what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're really humble, you're open. You're like, well, let me learn about this, or let me see what's here, and let me decide whether or not it's a fit or a truth or an illusion for me. And from that day forward, I've done my best. Sometimes I don't do very well, but I've done my best to practice that. And I think you are a prime example. I've spent a lot of time with you, either doing readings or talking or having you on my show. I've never encountered an ounce of ego in you. And I know it's in there somewhere. We all have it, right? We all have it, right? But you've always presented being open to me and being humble. So that's a real gift. And you've been a gift here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Robert, so much for having me. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is awesome.
And you're going to be at our event in October.
I will.
And we've got this eclipse happening, and it's the 5th year I've put together this event. And, if you could kind of put in a request to the muses that they show up around the eclipse, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. I think it would be kind of a spontaneous piece of magic there for the rest of us. Okay. So let's just get down to business. Shonagh Home is your website, right?
Yes.
ShonaghHome.org is your website.
And the mushroomsapprentice.com.
Mushroomsapprentice.com. You now have the YouTube channel and the podcast. I'll make sure all the links are here in the description of the show. And is there anything else you want to talk about before you?
No, I think we're good. I've taken up enough time. I think at this point we've gone for a while. So yeah, but thank you to all your listeners. Thank you so much. And don't hesitate to contact me. I would love to hear from you. I do private sessions as well, not just retreats. So I do a lot of those. So
right. Cool. All right, Shonagh. It's been great connecting with you, and you and I will talk soon. And it's going to be a new moon on Sunday. And we've got this really interesting green comet that's about to cut across our atmosphere. I'll talk more about that on Sunday night. But there's a lot of really interesting celestial events in the air this weekend. So go out and enjoy them, all right?
Thank you so much.
All right. You take care, Shonagh. Bye for now. All right. That was the great Shonagh Home. And you can find out more about her. ShonaghHome.org. And thank you for being here. Mods, thank you for hanging out in Chattaria. As always, I'm really grateful for what you do and grateful for everybody else who shows up here on Friday. Don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe, share, all those YouTube things. And if you want to become a member of the 11th house, I'll put a link in the description of the show. You can also go to my website, robertphoenix.com. And we have a Discord channel that members can go to. There's some benefits, discounts, a number of other things, and you get to help support the show. So for, I'm a working astrologer. So, a lot of the income that comes into my life comes through that window when I work with people. And if you want, you can also support this content as well. I don't charge for any of this content. No, I don't have a paywall. And that's not to say that people that do have a paywall are going about it the right. It's just my decision and my choice, right? So everything I do is accessible to the public unless I do a webinar or unless the members get together and we hang out on Discord, or sometimes I'll actually have like a Zoom where most recently we looked at the astrological influences for 2023. So I do some of those things as well, but everything is out there, right? So I do accept your support in that level and in that way as well. So feel free to look up the 11th house and become a member. I think that's it. All right. We'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. Check out the Astro Weather here on this channel, which I got into today. And for me and my pal Jasper, have a great weekend. Use your head in order to discern what's real. Your heart to see what's possible.